Hello and welcome to The Impact. I'm Mike McClanahan. Single-family homes are the dominant form of residential development across the state, and efforts to change single-family zoning laws at the local level are known to inspire fierce opposition from existing homeowners, and such proposals are frequently defeated. But new legislation under consideration in the state capitol would override local opposition and force cities and counties to accept other types of residential development in existing single-family zoning areas. House Bill 1110 would authorize the construction of up to 4 units per lot in all residential areas, even those that are currently zoned for single-family residences. It's meant to allow more density and potentially more affordable housing options for first-time home buyers and others who are priced out of home ownership altogether. The bill would override local zoning restrictions in cities of 6,000 or more residents statewide, or any city within the urban growth area of a city with 200,000 people. It would also allow a developer to build up to 6 units per lot if 2 of the 6 units are reserved for affordable housing. Affordable housing is defined as not more than 30% of the household income of renters taking in 60% of median household income in the county or less, or home buyers taking in 80% of the median income in the county or less. The Senate version of the bill is SB 5190. Supporters of the concept say allowing denser development with duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes will begin to address the shortage of available homes in Washington and could bring down the price per unit.
Passing HB 1110 would allow us to increase residential density equitably across the region and relieve displacement pressure on high displacement risk neighborhoods.
From 2015 to 2021, the median price of a home in Washington nearly doubled, from $289,000 to $560,000, according to the State Office of Financial Management. The Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit Up for Growth found that Washington's housing market was short by 140,000 homes as of 2019. And the state will need 1 million additional homes by 2044 to meet the projected demand from population growth, according to the State Department of Commerce. Opponents of the zoning override argue that it will change the character of neighborhoods, drive up the demand on local infrastructure and city or county services, and result in overcrowded streets and classrooms. Critics have also argued there's no guarantee that upzoning will bring down costs.
Even Seattle, which has the best transit service in the state, only has 19% of people that do not have a car. So saying that we should develop housing without an expectation of providing parking is really challenging for a number of our cities.
The 2023 upzoning bill is sponsored in the House by 2 Olympia-based legislators, Democratic State Representative Jessica Bateman and Republican State Representative Andrew Barkis. Thank you both for joining us today. Representative Bateman, I'd like to start with you. With the increase in housing prices, the surge has been so sharp over the last several years. Do you think this legislation could really make a difference in the cost of housing overall in Washington?
I do, and I'm very excited to be introducing this bipartisan legislation with my colleague, Representative Barkis. It is bipartisan because we recognize that the issue of affordability in our housing crisis is impacting our constituents all across the state. Housing is only affordable for first-time homebuyers in 3 counties in Washington, and they're all in Eastern Washington. We know we have a housing shortage of 140,000 homes. We need to make it legal to build modest homes of all shapes and sizes, like duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and sixplexes. And in addition to that, we also need to focus on other ways to streamline the process of building housing quicker and cheaper.
And Representative Barkis, what do you think?
Well, thank you for having us on to talk about this important subject. You know, I've been with you many times and we've talked about the housing crisis. I think the problem statement is clearly defined. We know what our state is facing, and over the last several years, I've worked on a lot of legislation to get at this issue, and Representative Bateman and I formed a relationship, have known each other for a long time, but now colleagues, saw this as an opportunity and saw this as an opportunity to work together to get at the key issues that have been preventing us from getting more supply into the system. So many other issues that we hear around the legislature revolve around the fact that we have a lack of supply. Affordability is the biggest one, cost of rent, cost of buying, all those different things. So this is a great piece of legislation, and as we're going to discuss, it's a centerpiece, but it's one of a suite. It is really focusing on supply side, but also really trying to work at removing the barriers that are numerous in the state of Washington with the regulatory permitting costs, all the things that are there that have just really stymied the process and the ability to have people and developers build the needed supply of housing here in our state.
And so I want to go back to you for the second question too. How does parking factor into this, and parking requirements as far as parking for each new unit of housing that exists in some cities or some areas? How does that factor into this debate?
Well, what it does is it eliminates minimum parking requirements within a half a mile of transit. The bill states that it would create a floor of allowing up to 6 plexes in cities 6,000 or greater, and you cannot have a minimum parking requirement. That doesn't mean that parking won't be built. It means that the developer, when they do the site assessment, they decide whether or not they're going to provide parking if it's marketable, and they will make that decision. That's near transit, so our hope is that people will be utilizing buses and mass transit. In the other areas of cities, what it does is it provides limits on minimum parking requirements. We know that we have a lot of parking already, and we want to make sure that it's an option for developers. If they feel like it's necessary, they can provide it, but there's going to be a limit on the minimums required.
And in terms of parking, what are the factors to consider when you look at how this applies to a place like Seattle or Bellevue versus a place that's more rural in character?
Well, it depends on where the location of the development is, and as Bateman has indicated, we see in certain marketplaces the ability to build this and really take advantage of the existing infrastructure for transit and other opportunities for people to be able to utilize that. Other areas don't have that, and as though it is developing. But really what we're trying to do is there's so many of these type of requirements that become those prohibiting factors. And so when you're trying to do this and says, well, you have to have X amount of parking, well, we really don't need that, or we really can't do that, well, then that development is foregone. It doesn't happen. So by removing this as one of those barriers, it allows that. But as has been stated, the developer and who's building this can still make those decisions. So based on the lot size, based on the marketability, based on all these different things, can still adequately provide the parking. And I think it's, I don't want to say it's a moot issue or a minor issue, but it is one that is easily resolvable, and I don't think will be a preventer when it comes to this piece of legislation.
So a follow-up question here. In terms of just the amount of pushback that you've heard from cities, from entities that really want to retain more control, this is essentially the state taking control of the zoning issue to some extent.
To some extent.
And so historically that's been difficult. It's been an uphill climb. Has the environment gotten to the point where this is more, people are more receptive to this?
You know, we were at a meeting, I think it was June. Lieutenant Governor Denny Heck pulled together a bunch of stakeholders, bipartisan, we talked about it. I truly believe that those who were voicing significant opposition over the last several years have come in. And one of the things that we stated is, look, everybody needs to come to the table and be willing to give a little bit. If we don't, we're never going to solve this. Thus the bipartisan approach, thus the broader appeal of a lot of these bills that we're talking about. I would say, and if the hearing was any indication yesterday, it was a tremendous hearing, and the support was overwhelmingly in favor of this piece of legislation. I have talked to both sides of the equation, and although there is still some concerns, any piece of legislation is going to get worked over the course of this session. There are things that we're still working on when it comes to making it happen, but our good friends, Association of Washington Cities, have worked diligently on this. They did their own process to come alongside and see where they could really fit into this, and they testified other, and that's huge. That is not opposition. That means, hey, we like this bill. We think there's some opportunities to make it better and to find that common ground. The common ground is what we need to find. If we do not leave this legislative session with comprehensive housing legislation that's going to move the ball, we failed. And I think we failed the people of Washington State. We have just not done that over the last several years. It's a point of emphasis, and that's why I think you see the stakeholders really coming together and coalescing on this.
What's your perspective, Representative Bateman?
I think that the temperature in the room has changed over the last couple years because the housing crisis has continued to get worse. It's impacting constituents across the entire state, all the way from Bellingham to Spokane to Vancouver, even to the west side of the coast. So, we're not just talking about one element of which we focused a lot on, which is low-income housing, or focusing on funding homelessness housing, or for people that have been homeless. We're talking now about people that are being impacted that are working families, people that are nurses, people that are firefighters, EMS. This has impacted much larger swaths of our population because it's gotten so much worse. So in recognition of that and how it's impacting our constituents everywhere, and it's all the way down from low-income people to median-income people, even to some upper income people, the recognition is we do have to act on this, because without it, over the next 20 years, Department of Commerce is telling us we need to build 1 million homes, half of which need to be affordable at 30 to 50% AMI. Our Housing Trust Fund has created 55,000 homes in the last 40 years. So the math tells us that we're in a shortage right now. We're short 140,000. We're building about 44,000 per year. We really do have to be strategic, act quickly, and focus with a laser focus on how do we get our housing market up and running? How do we reduce those barriers to construction? How do we enable all different types of home types for people so they can, developers and builders and property owners can respond to the market, which is young people don't know if they're ever gonna own a home. They're being priced out of their communities. They're postponing having families because they can't afford a place to live. That's equity that they could be building. That's intergenerational wealth building that could be happening. So I think that all has impacted the Association of Washington Cities. Legislators are hearing this. This last year, they all went out and were campaigning and talking to their voters. It's prevalent everywhere. So I think we all know we have to do something. The AWC came in and said, we are other. We have some concerns, some technical concerns we want to express, maybe some concessions, which we are open to having those discussions because we're committed to getting to a yes on this legislation.
There has been a debate in recent years, especially as the housing affordability crisis has gotten worse, about whether or not the Growth Management Act is too restrictive when it comes to where people can build or some of the regulations relating to housing. We also have heard in previous interviews with representatives of the construction industry about just the cost of permitting, the delay, the time it takes to get things approved, and how that impacts the overall cost of housing in Washington. Is there an appetite in your caucus? Have you heard, where do you stand on other regulations or additional land policies that maybe could potentially factor into this debate?
Well, we have, like I said before, a suite of bills that are bipartisan that we're hearing in the Housing Committee that are tailored and aimed directly at what you're talking about, which is permit reform, impact fee deferment, lot splitting, looking at all of the tangentially related things that will actually impact the cost of construction, which is then reflected in the price of the home or in the cost for rent. I would refer to my colleague over here to talk about permit reform. I know that's something he's very passionate, has been working on. But yes, we're open to all of it. And in fact, what we've been doing is talking about how we can't solve this with just one single policy. That can be complicated in the legislature because we have 1 million bills that come before us. But for something that has been decades in the making, we really do have to have a package and focus on increasing the supply of housing, focusing on keeping people stable in their homes, and then also focusing on support with things like we traditionally do with the Housing Trust Fund.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would just say I agree. Unfortunately, the legislature has been, in a lot of ways, the source of the problem. Regulation has been at the crux of that. GMA, you mentioned the GMA. The GMA has been one of those pieces that every time you come up to that, and you'll hear inside, outside the UGA, can't do this, can't do that. And again, this is when I talk about we've got to get back into the center and say, it's time to take a broader look at this. And you're really seeing some of these stakeholders that the minute you talk about GMA, they're like, no, absolutely not. They have to come to the middle and start talking about this. I did a presentation, I think it was 2018, talked about if we can start to lower the cost of construction, 20 to 25%, and laid out a plan on how to do that, reducing fees, reducing regulatory, allowing for different types of development, all the different pieces that would put into play that if we would start to consider. Unfortunately, the legislature is a broad mix of people and ideas and ideologies, right? So you have these other things, whether it has to do with landlord-tenant law, which is one of my favorite things, or GMA, or any of the myriad of climate policy. Good intentions, good bills that have different things, but they all will impact, at the end, the affordability. They'll impact the ability for our builders to build. And so when we start talking these broad policies, we really need to think about their impact to the overall agenda, the overall problem that we have. It doesn't do us any good to further this piece of legislation and the others if right behind it we're doing other legislation that is going to add costs, add further requirements, and make it harder and harder. One of our stakeholders, I mentioned this yesterday, talked to us about the time frame, and they said, this particular bill, along with a couple other suites, if we look at the time from conception to the time of actually somebody taking the keys to their new house, can be anywhere from upwards of 40 months to get that done. 40 months to get into the supply chain. This bill alone, with a couple other ones around it, cuts that in half. That's a huge step. So if we can cut that in half and we keep chipping away at that to get at it quicker so that people can get through that. The permit reform bill should be hopefully dropped in the next day or so. And there's a couple others that are coming from both sides. Those will coalesce into something that we can really get at some of those delays that start right at the beginning when people are going in and saying, I want to build this, here's my plan, and then they end up going through this process that could take years for them to finally be able to put the shovel in the ground and turn the dirt.
In terms of what you're hearing or have heard from developers and that sort of, I guess, constituency about this issue, how much of an appetite is there out in the broader public for allowing this sort of development to happen? In other words, do you think people are ready to jump on projects and ready to start building these quickly if they're allowed to build them pretty much wherever they want?
Right. So first, right now, according to our building permits statewide, about 5% of them, of that 44,000, are for middle type housing. The vast majority of cities make it illegal to build middle housing in the majority of their residential land use areas. So those are not home products that we have seen be developed on a large scale because it's illegal to do so. We have heard in the areas, and we heard testimony yesterday, that certain cities where they have made it legal to build these home types, that developers have responded. I mean, it makes sense. There is such a demand for housing. When you can provide a product that is more affordable, obviously there is a huge demand for that, so they're going to respond to that demand. That does not mean that we aren't going to have to take additional steps. This is not something that we're going to be able to pass this suite of bills this year and then just forget about it. We're still going to do things like looking at, financing, making sure that people are getting financial products, loans for these types of homes. We've got condo reform on the table. We're hoping that will enable more of these to be homes that people can actually buy and be homeowners of. You could be a homeowner of one part of a duplex. We also need to think about things like workforce. Right now we're pretty constrained with our workforce, with tradespeople building these types of home types. So we're going to have to continue tracking how much construction is happening, what type of construction is happening. Cities are going to need assistance with template ordinances so they can actually enact these things and get assistance with that. So we're going to have to keep working at this, but I have no doubt that developers will be able to respond to the huge demand for housing.
And, do you predict that this will fundamentally change the way neighborhoods look? And if so, in what way?
Well, I don't think it will fundamentally. I think that was one of the big, pushbacks in the last couple of years. It was presented originally, this bill, this concept, as the banning of single-family homes. That is not the case. I mean, if somebody wants to build a single-family home on a lot that accompanies that, they can do that. If a duplex. A great testimony yesterday in the hearing said, think about a lot of the products that are being built today. You can build a townhome or duplex that looks like a single-family home. You still have the elements, but we are working on the design element piece too, because there are barriers there and preventers of, the type of color paint, type of brick, those type of things, the sidewalk to nowhere, as I always like to say. But these homes will fit into their neighborhoods. It's not like you're going to have this, type of situation where all of a sudden a neighborhood, the character of the neighborhood has changed dramatically because you have a duplex put in there. And I think that concern will be addressed. There is still, at the local level, the ability to do that. And but to your other point, I just think it's super important. In my conversations with builders and developers and contractors, yes. I mean, they want to build the product. They build what they can. They build what is they're able to do and for profit, make the money, and to be able to do more as a business, right? And so you see a lot of different segments being built today, a lot of multifamily, because you have the land available. There's only certain types of things you can do. So I think this will open up the door not only to existing builders, but new and future builders that are getting into the trades, because we are focused on that in the legislature. We have been focused on that with our labor partners and everybody else to try to really push that issue of getting that workforce development. And you'll see you'll see people that will specialize in this and people that will want to build this because they can afford to build it, they can build a product that's affordable, they can make money doing it as a company to continue that on. So a lot of benefits within that side part of it.
I've got just a little bit under 3 minutes left. So quickly, if we could talk about property tax implications or lot valuations. If you can build more than one residence on a lot, seems that the value of the lot will go up. Do you think this would have a substantial impact on property values on a given street? Say if 3 of 5 lots become duplex or larger multi-unit.
I think actually, well, in my conversations with my local assessor, that is not something that I'm afraid of happening. The way that our property taxes work here is, we could actually see a leveling off or more stability in our property taxes when there are more housing units and more homes for those taxes to be applied to, because it's going to be applied more broadly. I think Representative Barkis might have more information on that in his field of work, but that's not something that we've heard voiced as a significant concern from assessors, nor my local assessor, and I think that we'll continue to work on that and monitor that to see if that's the case.
I've always said, let's not raise the property taxes, let's raise the quantity of ability or the quantity of those taxes in order to collect, in order to provide the essential services to our local governments, et cetera. Values will go up, but again, that speaks to the ability to gain equity, the ability to generational wealth, all the different things that come in that. So I don't really see it as a negative impact. I mean, we can talk about taxes as far as a negative impact, and we've seen property taxes go up considerably over the last several years. So there will be that leveling out, but it'll be based on what the market does. It'll be based on what the lot, the product, the value, everything that goes into that. So it has not been raised as a huge concern. I think that, again, you're going to see such a broad swath of product available that will hit all segments of that, from the affordable up to the middle to whatever that can be built, depending on what the locality and depending on what the market bears.
So if you could, in 30 seconds or more, or less rather, encapsulate anything I didn't ask you or closing remarks about this issue.
We've talked a lot about the technical components of this bill, and rightfully so. What I would say is this is about the future of Washingtonians being able to have access to abundant and affordable housing. I have a little sister who is a nurse, who has a partner, and who cumulatively, they cannot afford a home. This is impacting working people. This is impacting our ability as a state to be economically competitive. We heard from Chambers of Commerce yesterday talking about how they cannot retain or recruit employees because of the lack of housing. We have to be bold. This is the year to address housing. We are well suited and well positioned to do that. I'm very enthusiastic about the partnership, especially across the aisle. We're going to get this done this year.
And if you could briefly encapsulate your closing remarks.
I would just say that I echo the sentiments of my good colleague, Representative Bateman, but there's 16 bills, and I in February will be 7 years in the legislature. I have been championing housing policy since the day I walked in the building, and it's been difficult. And this is the first year that I believe that the light bulb has gone on. People are recognizing that. You see these 16 bills and more coming together, and because this is such a point of emphasis, we're going to get some stuff done, and I think it's going to be great for the people of Washington State when we walk out the door, hopefully in late April.
We're going to have to leave it there. Representative Barkis, Representative Bateman, thank you both for your time. We appreciate your perspective.
You bet.
Still ahead on The Impact, we'll tell you how lawmakers are looking to crack down on impaired driving and give Washington one of the strictest DUI thresholds in the country. Stay with us. State lawmakers are reviewing a bill to give Washington one of the strictest drunk driving thresholds in the U.S.
The victims of drunk and drug driving crashes are not statistics. They're mothers, children, spouses, and brothers.
Senate Bill 5002 would lower the blood alcohol concentration level that constitutes driving under the influence from 0.08% to 0.05%, meaning fewer alcoholic drinks would put someone over the legal limit to get behind the wheel. If passed, the DUI threshold would change on July 1st, and Washington would join Utah as one of only 2 states where the legal blood alcohol level is lower than 0.08%. Another bill would extend the look-back used to determine if someone arrested for DUI faces misdemeanor or felony charges based on repeat offenses. It would change the threshold for felony charges from 3 prior DUIs in the last 10 years to 3 in the last 15 years. Senate Bill 5032 would also create a new drug offender sentencing alternative for DUI cases. Please join us next week when we'll look at a proposed law to build climate change planning into local government land use decisions. I'm Mike McClanahan. Thank you for watching and have a great week.